In the back of a math class sit a boy and a girl, chatting away about the stories that they've been writing in their free time over the past few years. He suffers from depression, although most wouldn't know it. She is perfectly content with her diagnosis of autism. He is gay, and she is bisexual. During a biology class, a transgender boy grits his teeth, preparing himself for the pain of a cis-normative anatomy discussion. He watches the teacher in trepidation, awaiting what is sure to come, although it never does. Rather, the class is respectful of this distinction between sex and gender, and he comes to realize that he is safe here. A mixture of social anxiety and claustrophobia result in an anxiety attack in the midst of a school assembly. She breaks down in tears and exits the building, terrified of the idea of this happening again. The staff take note, and she is never again assigned to sit in the middle of an aisle, but permitted to sit off to the side where she won't be overwhelmed. A young boy limps from class to class, up and down flights of stairs, desperately hoping that his impairment won't make him late. He is relieved to learn that special accommodation will be made for him for his exams, and his grades remain steady. Two brothers stand outside the school library, explaining once again that they are full-blood siblings, as their friends gawk at the contrast in their skin tones. One pale, one black. Diversity is everywhere in schools. Up to 11% of Australians may identify as a member of the LGBT community, and 7.1% of children born in Australia are estimated to be intersex. On top of this, LGBT students are 3 times more likely to experience depression than their heterosexual cisgender peers. Internationally, approximately 1 in 68 children have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and in Australia, around 7% of children under the age of 14 have been reported as having a disability. These disabilities can be obvious, such as confinement to a wheelchair or missing an appendage, or more discreet, such as autism, learning impairments, depression, anxiety, and chronic pain conditions. Students with these invisible conditions may keep this information to themselves, sometimes in fear of being treated as different, and other times at the other end of the spectrum, in fear of being overlooked because they look fine. But what does this have to do with teaching? I am still quite young, and the memories of my time and experiences at school are still fresh in my mind. These scenarios that I've introduced to you aren't hypotheticals. They're about real people that I encountered during my schooling. Students with mental health problems are not a rare occurrence, and it is something that I have always felt very strongly about. As all of my closest friends have been gay, bisexual, autistic, depressed, disabled, and more, my views on what makes a good teacher goes a lot further than knowing the content and how to teach it. It's about knowing your students and how to help them learn, which is much more complex than just reciting curriculum. I achieved decent grades in each of my high school classes without having to put too much effort in terms of the cognitive load, whereas my friends with learning disabilities had a much more difficult time when it came to regulating their grades. At times it was hard for them to step back and acknowledge that being smart wasn't the only way to measure their success as a student. But the teachers at our school were always incredibly supportive and encouraging of students' non-academic interests, including creative outlets, sports, and even video games. It helped us to see that our interests were being valued, and it boosted our engagement and motivation in our subjects to know that we could discuss with other subjects with our teachers when the work was done. As Sir Ken Robinson stated, human communities depend upon a diversity of talent, not a singular conception of ability. If we were all good at the same core subjects with no variation, such as math and English, who would be there to create our art, write our stories, and keep us entertained? School needs to reflect this, to acknowledge that intelligence isn't just a measure of how well a student can perform on a standardized test in any given subject. My high school practiced these values, which has demonstrated to me that it can be done, and that students can be made to feel valued, safe, and supported in a schooling environment, when the teachers can take the time to get to know them. It is these values and ideals that shape my personal beliefs about what makes a good teacher and what makes a good school.